What's it like being a podcaster in a niche inside a niche? 4 different podcasters come together in this episode, all with podcasts about the veterinary medical field. They all have different styles and unique perspectives. The Veterinary Innovation Council helped us attend the Veterinary Innovation Summit organized by NAVC, so we could learn and meet to talk about innovation in vet med and podcasting, which I like to think is a little innovative in the veterinary industry as well. We talk about what we learned at the Innovation Summit and why we are podcasters. We also talk about some podcasting strategies. So I hope this very special episode is useful to other podcasters who may not even be in a veterinary or animal related podcasting space. This conversation still highlights a mission at Vet Life Reimagined, and that's about being curious to the possibilities and finding things that allow you to thrive and enjoy what you do. One thing I love about podcasting is the many people I get to meet and the relationships I am building. In this episode, you will hear from Ryan Leach, host of the Bird Bath podcast, Dr. Matt Asciutto, host of The Greatest Profession, Stacy Purcell of the People of Animal Health podcast, and me, Dr. Megan Sprinkle, your host of Vet Life Reimagined. So let's go and start with how we all ended up at the Veterinary Innovation Summit.
I guess the way this came about is kind of an interesting story. So we met at AVMA.
True. Yes.
Matt was the spark of entrepreneurship, I think, to have a booth at AVMA, which was super cool.
And I met you there too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The number of people who came up and they're like, "Oh, you have a podcast?"
Yeah.
Like, I also have a podcast. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's not. Oh, thank God.
That's exactly what I said to you.
Yeah.
Well, and then we were there with Dr. Crocker,
Yes.
and she was there, and we said, "Oh, this would be so cool if you could like record live episodes." And Matt was like, "Yeah, that's what I'm doing." And I was like, "Yeah, it would be cool if someone else paid for this for us."
Right.
And they were like, "Yeah, that would be super cool." And I was like, let me get to work on this. And so Chris Kelly, who writes the Fountain Report, who runs Intelligence, reached out to Aaron with the Veterinary Innovation Council and said, hey, are you guys open to this? I mocked up like a little thing of like, here's what we do. We'll have great podcasters come, like extra talk around have people talk about what's going on. Chris reached out to Aaron. Aaron was like, yeah, okay. He was like, who do you have in mind? I said, well, I met this guy, Matt. And he goes, oh, he's my neighbor.
Yeah.
Is it really?
I live
Near him. Well, there's like 20 of us in Fort Collins.
It's a small world.
Yeah, he was like, I see him all the time. And I was like, get him. Make it happen. And then we reached out to some other people and we got the original crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my goal, I'd I'd love for us to do it at VMX. For sure next year, I'd love to do it here again. But
We're the founders.
There's so many podcasts in the industry that it would be cool. And like we saw, you're not going to record, you don't need 40 hours in the room to record. Right. We can have 20 people all do podcasts and just fill up a schedule. And people were curious, what's going on? What's in that room?
Glass box in the middle of the trade show floor.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking for VMX, because they did that for Vetfolio. They do a soundproof booth in the NAVC booth,
right,
and they recorded the Vetfolio and a couple other podcasts.
Soundproof glass booth right in the middle of the floor, and people are just
walking around.
Yeah. Well, that's what. So it sounds crazy, but that's what I was trying to price out with Aaron, and I think it's not that expensive.
It's as expensive as renting a chair. It's so expensive to rent a couple of chairs and a table from these conferences. Which I learned when I had the AVMA booth. Mm-hmm. They're like, do you want this chair? It's $4,000.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You can buy one of those room things for the big ones you can get for $11,000.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. The small little phone booth ones.
Yeah.
They're about $4,000.
Yeah.
Because I thought about it too for confessionals at the DVM. You just go into the booth and you record a little thing.
Yeah.
It would be cool to have, but I didn't have $4,000 to drop. So.
And then you gotta ship it. That's the expensive part.
Right.
Shipping the box around.
Well, that's why it's nice at partnering. I'd love for this to be something we partner with the NAVC and do it, because they have a warehouse where they keep all of their trade show stuff. They load it on a semi truck, right? They that all of the stuff that the Innovation Council brought came from Orlando. And so that was the thing. And so we're the goal is that doing something like this, letting people know that it happened, doing those things that, maybe VMX or next year at this conference and other things. It's like, yeah, we got the booth.
Sponsors.
Yeah, I think we could get sponsors. I think we could get, and then my goal would be like, put out the list, allow people to sign up for spots, reserve it, and then have just a flat screen outside that's just like, now recording, Vet Life Reimagined, and like people can walk by and be like, oh, what's going on there? Okay, oh, here's a QR code. All right, cool, I'm downloading this. Oh, I saw them record that live. Like, how cool.
We could do cross promotions. We'll all be on each other's podcasts too.
Yeah.
So it'd be
And
super
that's
cool.
the drop.
The drop.
Drop in the drop.
Yeah.
Exactly, multi-purpose on that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, when you were talking about having this glass booth in the middle of probably the expo hall, where they have the kittens usually?
Yeah.
So we're going to
Yes.
be the next step up.
We
You
can-
can go see the kittens, or you can see a bunch of podcasters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or both. Or
Put a
both.
kitten in the
Put us
podcast booth.
together. Oh,
Yeah.
that'd be cool. Yeah, there you go.
You'll have to like interview people from like a little hammock on a window. And
Yeah.
Just so people know.
I want that cat that's here at the show to come, the one that just sits on the chair and doesn't move.
That's
Like,
Bug. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that cat. He could sit in the podcaster.
Yeah.
Bug is Ken Lambert
Yeah.
who comes to every show.
Yeah.
It just amazes me. He stays on the seat and he doesn't move.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had cat. I don't have a cat right now. My cats in the past would be running around the room.
Yeah. Yeah, he was on a bus with us in San Antonio at Vet Forum, and the cat crawled down the side of the window and then to like the front ledge of the bus window and laid down. Took a little nap while we were driving down the highway. I was like, the band though was really funny at that conference because Ken brought Bug to dinner at this country western place that we went to, and the lead singer of the band goes, "Holy crap, is that a real cat?"
I don't want to get Ken in trouble, but at the Veterinary Innovation Summit 2 years ago when it was in Kansas City, there is a very cool venue here locally called Bar K, and it is a half bar, half dog.
I've been there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
But it's dog. And so Bug came to the little reception that was there, which cats apparently are not allowed, which when is that stopped? But
Right.
it was just so cool. Like the staff loved this cat.
Yeah.
All of the staff, which by the way, remember this cat's not supposed to be here. All the staff would stop and talk to Bug, pet Bug, and it was fantastic. So
Bug walks on a leash, so Bug fits in.
yes, yep, there you go. He
Yeah,
was blending
Barcade
in. just.
just got acquired by a private equity firm.
I didn't know.
I did hear that.
I heard it on the Bird Bath podcast.
Great plug.
We got a tour of that with the founder. We were at that Nestle Innovation Summit a couple years ago, and we got to tour that. It was super cool.
We have a couple like that in Dallas, but nothing that's done to that level of like quality.
Can I ask like what everyone's podcast is like about to get it on record? You know.
Great place to start. Since you
No, I'm not going to. I asked the question.
Okay,
I'll
right,
go
you
penultimate, so I don't also go last.
We'll go in a circle. So the Bird Bath is a weekly news podcast. So the goal is to take all of the news that's happened throughout the week that's way more than everyone can digest and read and have time to do. And I read it. I look through all of it, and I work with the Fountain Report, who curates the top stories with me. And then I take all of that news and I make it into a 10 to 12 minute episode so that you can digest it on your way into the practice. You can digest it over lunch. Like the goal is get the top stories, and I want it to be accessible for all levels of the profession. So there's technicians that, might not have the opportunity to be able to hear about the corporate group that owns their practice. If they get a new investment from a company with certain history or background, I want them to know what's going on in their company. But I also want the CEOs of the other companies to know what's going on with each other. So company news, acquisitions, some like new drugs releases, pet food releases, so the whole gamut of it. So.
Cool. Yeah, I used what I like listen to because after we met, all the people, I'm like, I gotta listen to at least like an episode of everyone's podcast now. And I listened to one, and I have this idea that I was like, it would be cool to do a weekend update style for veterinary medicine.
Oh my gosh!
And so I was using yours as like material. I'm like, oh, this could work.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you could do a whole thing, yeah.
No, so because my background is like improv and all that stuff, and when I was in Chicago, I was doing improv with the Improv Olympic, and there was this class on writing, like they had like a 3-part whatever class on writing, and one of them was just joke writing, as if you were to get a job at like Letterman or Conan or whatever, and that was the most fun like class experience I've probably ever had, because every week you have to go out and read the news and then come up with, I think it was 10 jokes, and then you have to pitch those jokes based on the news to everyone in the room every week, and then you have like other things too.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was telling
So
Stacy. In college, I started with my roommate a newspaper called The Muddler, which was our campus's version of The Onion.
Nice.
And so we would, take the relevant news stories and flip it around and change it to be ridiculous stories and all of that. My skill set was exclusively coming up with headlines. Then we had writers, and I was like, here's a funny premise.
Yeah.
Give us something good.
Funny comedian.
Yeah.
Get in your room, writer.
It's a good skill to have because, I mean, with me looking into YouTube and things like that, a lot of the recommendations is actually to start with your title of your video. So being able to come up with good headlines and then going from there is actually a very good skill. So there you go.
By the way, I really like the graphic on your podcast. Who did the graphic?
The internet. AI.
Oh.
So
Oh no.
AI.
We were duped.
So I used Midjourney and prompted Midjourney. My idea was that I wanted it to be, it was actually pretty timely because Twitter had just changed to X, and so they weren't using the bird anymore, which the first time I started someone a little blue bird, they're like, that's Twitter's logo. I was like, I didn't even think about them. But I've thought of the birds in Cinderella that like fly around and put her clothes on and stuff. And I was like, oh, those little birds are cute. So I said, we had Midjourney do Cinderella style bird, higher definition, podcasting on a bird bath. And water flowing, okay, reduce the flowers, increase, okay, change the microphone style, and iterated to get to my little guy there.
Love it.
Yeah.
It's very cool. My son, he goes to the University of Oklahoma, and he's studying computer science, and he's minoring in AI. And so he and his professor just built a website. It's called AITist, like AI plus artist, and they're designing art through AI, and they're selling it on the internet. And they actually have a couple websites. On one of the websites, they're telling people the art is made by AI. The other one, they're not. And they're having a competition between the two sites to see which one sells more art. And then it's like a research project. They're going to write a paper on it then.
I love it.
So, I mean, I guess that does fit right into some of the stuff that we talked about here at this conference, which is like the AI stuff, which is wild. I mean, I don't want to like jump around too much, but that I feel like is this conference is you're just plodding along. You're like, gee, I wonder what I should be using instead. Look what probiotic would be best in this case. And then like all of a sudden they're like, by the way, we're going to cure cancer by putting ultrasound in your head. And it's like, oh
Yeah.
my.
What Matt is talking about here is the opening keynote presentation with Dr. Mary Lou Jepson. Her background includes the executive director of engineering at both Google and Facebook. She has founded 4 successful startups. She is a former MIT professor. She has been on many top influential people lists, and she's a brain tumor cancer survivor. One of her startups is Open Water, where Jepson is developing medical technology with phase waves that can be tuned to a very specific wavelength to target very specific areas in the body, just like an opera singer can find the right sound frequency to vibrate and then shatter a glass. They have research in cancer, stroke, and mental diseases.
Who I know from that partner, she was talking about, I didn't know all the different payment options for clients to go out and pay their bills at the veterinary clinic. So she said, I learned all that here today.
Yeah, it's kind of cool how innovation can be like helping people pay. Like buy now, pay later is an innovative product that got sort of democratized and brought out. But yeah, you could also shoot laser beams into your brain and explode cancer cells.
But
vibrate cancer cells.
And hope it doesn't explode your brain in the process.
find out. We will find out.
Yeah.
So the thing that I loved was the speaker that talked about the genomics, but it was a little bit like Pandora's box. It was like, okay, what happens if we do all, he's talking about, I built a company to create viruses, and he's like, you can take a laptop and create a virus in 8 hours, and like school children could create these viruses. It's like, maybe we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. I do think that the interesting thing about this conference is that basically the premise is that a lot of this stuff is coming one way or the other. Whether we're involved in that process is kind of up to us. So we can say like, oh, we don't want AI or random viruses to like influence our life moving forward. But the fact of the matter is that those things are happening. So how do we want to play a responsible role?
Yeah, that's true.
So Stacy, I said what the bird bath is.
Yeah.
And then Matt just,
That's right.
he goes in a whole different world. But what's your podcast all about?
Yeah, so the People of Animal Health podcast is about the people of animal health and veterinary medicine. So what inspired me to start that podcast is, as an executive recruiter with the Vet Recruiter, over the last 27 years, I have interviewed thousands of professionals across the animal health industry, and I've heard the most fascinating stories, a lot about entrepreneurs. So I interviewed the person who started the Marielle company that was sold to BI, but all these people that started these companies that are now big companies. And like yesterday, I interviewed Catherine Haskins, and she told the story about how she got into the animal health industry. And it's an interesting story, so you'll have to listen to the whole podcast when it comes out in a couple of weeks. But, I get asked all the time from my candidates, well, how do you get from an entry-level job to being the CEO of Lanco or whatever? And so I have people tell their stories about how they got into the industry and how they got from point A to B to C. And it's very inspiring just to hear about people's successes and the habits that they do on a daily basis that cause them to have great success.
Do you have a time frame that you keep them in, or do you just take the story and run with it at however?
We take the story and run with it. So the shortest, I think, has been around 25 minutes, and the longest was over an hour. So we try to keep around 45 minutes. So one with Catherine yesterday was about half an hour. So we try not to go over 45, but sometimes the stories are so interesting, they end up going over an hour.
We had that with our old podcast with Consolidate That when we had Sean McVeigh who was on the founding team of Pathway, and we ended up splitting it into a 2-part episode because we're like an hour and a half in, and we would try to keep those episodes around 25 to 30 minutes. We're like, all right, we're going deep, we're going in. We split that. Because you start one story and then you're miles down the road into the details, and you're like, all right, but
is that podcast still running?
So we stopped Consolidate That. So Dr. Ivan Zach and I, who did Consolidate That, Ivan just is launching a new podcast called The Bark Side with Dr. Polly from Australia, Gerardo Polly. And so they're doing that. But Ivan and I worked together for a long time. And then we finished one of our episodes. And after recording, we both stayed on to debrief. And both of us at pretty much the time were like, I think we've done it. We've talked about everything that we want to cover in this topic. And we were both like, yeah. And I was like, all right, cool. We have 3 more people scheduled. So, and then after that, we'll both do our own ones and, support each other and all that. So, and then Ivan still does the Veterinary Innovation podcast with Sean Wilkie. So,
did you do an ending?
Yeah, we did. We did it was kind of fun. So we did a thank you episode. It was maybe 8-10 minutes, and we talked about 2 or 3 of our favorite episodes and highlighted those. I still go back and use the episodes that we have, because we talked about operational efficiency, really, really minute details within veterinary medicine, how to operate veterinary practices and businesses. So I use some of those of hey, if you want to understand how to do quarterly planning, we did a whole episode on that. So it's still a good database resource.
Cool.
But a goodbye episode was fun.
Yeah. Because you just think of podcasts as they just prattle on forever into the ether. Because many of them that are not serialized or, in these seasons, I don't know, you just talk to people ad nauseum until you die. So, at some point, do you just stop? Or how do you do a goodbye? That's cool.
It was cool because it was nice that we both felt hey, I think because we were covering our view of consolidation in the veterinary industry, and at that time, and as it currently is, it's starting to change a little bit, but private equity was slowing down its investment. There were fewer investments happening, fewer people were consolidating practices at the time, and we just sort of is there a need for a podcast talking about an industry that's currently stalled and that both of us weren't heavily actively participating in it anymore? So so it was a nice it was nice to both be like, okay, yeah, this is good. So yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, tell us about your podcast.
Thank you. So I started Vet Life Reimagined a year and a half ago, and it's a weekly podcast episode. It was inspired by a lot of people reaching out to me and asking me about my personal career journey, because I entered industry pretty early on, and so it was kind of in the height of the pandemic, and I think burnout was especially high. And so when I would chat with these individuals, I realized they really had a narrow view of what they could do as veterinary professionals. And so each episode is talking with an individual in the profession about their career journeys and also what they're passionate about within our space. And so it's really to highlight the possibilities of vet med, which are completely endless. It's fantastic,
Yeah.
which is also a good theme for this summit as well, as Veterinary Innovation Summit is really opening up the possibilities in the profession.
Rename the summit to Vet Life Reimagined. I mean, like, you could just sponsor it.
Well, it's kind of cool. You're catching a lot of people in the middle of their journey of what Stacy's catching as they're continuing that next step of their journey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because mine is not so much focused on entry-level people, but
Yeah.
a lot of it's entrepreneurs. Some are veterinarians, some are not. Had one of the board of director members from Zoetis, people that start technology companies, and Julia Stefanis was on there. She started Summit Vet Farm and was a big part of Argenta, and just some really cool stories.
We were talking about ending podcasts and things like that. A lot of what all of us do, I personally think, are evergreen content. So even if we were at a point where we needed to end, or that can still live on, and people can still benefit from hearing people's stories. Or, even going back and hearing the news sometimes is really interesting in retrospect. It's like, what was happening a year ago? Or,
It is funny. Sometimes people will be like, oh, I just listened to your episode about this funding round. I was like, that was in early September. I was like, I've completely moved on in my brain. And they're like, yeah, I was listening to that episode. I was like, all right, cool. It's still relevant. It's still something that happened. But yeah, it is cool. And then you do YouTube.
yes. So
You do all the platforms.
I do. So even first starting out, I, of course, did a lot of research ready to do this, and of course, an avid podcast listener as well. And so while there's mixed opinions, I thought, hey, why not start and do it all? So I do a video and audio podcast. So the video goes out on YouTube, which is great. It has a little bit more of a search feature to it to help me out a little bit. But then, I use a hosting platform that it also gets out on all audio platforms.
Do you find that most of your listeners are coming to you still through traditional podcast platforms, or are they coming YouTube?
Yeah, so actually I think they are different audiences. So the people who want to listen or watch on YouTube might be a slightly different audience than the people who are listening on audio. And I'm hoping maybe that it will reach audiences of all ages as well. So, one of my personal beliefs is if we can let people know, younger and younger, all the possibilities that are in this profession, I think we set them up for being more curious and open to different opportunities and interest, maybe in getting into the profession. So I think it is potentially maybe a younger audience that may find it on YouTube first. Podcast in general is a long game. It is not something like you are going to be a huge influencer overnight by starting a podcast. And similarly with this niche and this style, I'm not going to be this huge YouTube sensation. But the YouTube channel,
you never know.
Maybe. At least not right out of the gate, we'll say that. But all subscribes help, so please. But yes, so it took a lot longer for the YouTube channel to kind of get some momentum. But now it's doing a lot better. So I'm seeing some good gradual, actually even a little bit faster maybe than audio. So again, thank you. That search feature I think may help.
Yeah. And then do you do all the reels and the minisodes and all that stuff?
I tried and try, but I start to max out on time and capacity. the video podcast is really the most time consuming because I don't just put out the video content. I actually go through and put B-roll on top of it so it's engaging, flip views and screen from what I am capable of doing. So I try to make it really engaging visually as well. And so that's really what starts to take up a lot of time.
So what do you mean about like how? Like what do you insert?
Yeah, so I am an active Canva user. So I use Canva to
She's using it right now. You can't see her.
Yeah, probably. It's probably on in the background. It may be up, I don't know. But so Canva is my canvas, and I start with the right size frame, and I use little video clips, or especially like, for example, the last episode that went out as we're recording this was Andy Rourke. And he's great. He has content all over the place that I can pull from and use as B-roll. So I do a lot of digging on my guests on top of it, especially if they are bigger with content available. So I may pull pictures of the guests, just kind of illustrate some of what we're talking about. I will make them from scratch, even if it's just words kind of moving on the screen, just to, again, engage your eyes.
Video is a whole other level.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, especially that way, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because when I'm doing it, I'm not. I just edit it. Well, right now I'm paying a person, which I don't know, whatever. But I put it all into Adobe, and then I edit out like the video, condense it together, and I just export the audio file, and so then those things are the same. So like I also have it on YouTube, which is like, this is why I asked, because there's like 7 views on YouTube. I'm like, why am I wasting my time? but yeah, but that sounds like a lot more effort than what I'm doing.
But I had the same feelings too when I first started. Like each video might get like 7 views or something like that, and it's really discouraging, early on, because it is so much work.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, that was one of my goals of finding a news partner when I started mine, because I was like, okay, yeah, I could probably scrape the news together, but I was like, my big thing was I'm looking for a distribution channel primarily, and because it's consistency is the hardest thing, especially when you go, all right, let me check my numbers. Okay, 6,
right?
And I listened to it 3 times. All right, and you're like, all right, well, back to it. Post it back out there, and it is tough. But I don't remember what the number is. What is it like? It's a staggering number of podcasts that last less than 10 episodes.
Yeah, I thought it was 95% make it past, or don't make it to 20.
Yeah,
that's what something like that.
Yeah, it's something that's.
That's why I didn't market it until after I waited until after I had 20 episodes before I did the booth. Before I marketed it really in any way other than just like, hey guys, friends of mine, like, will you please listen to this? Yeah. Because I wanted to make sure I was going to keep doing it. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
So how many have you done now?
In terms of what are released, I think it's 26, 27, something like that. There's a lot more that are recorded, but I'm not doing it weekly. I am doing I do an interview and then a meanderings episode, which is like a reflection on the interview. And so I have all these like banked interviews. Right now, the one that I recorded last will probably be like February. So, and this is October or something. Yeah. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It is nice, but I'm like, it is nice, but I create a lot of the promo material like later, and so now I'm like going back and I'm listening to the episodes, which I guess is okay, but it's like in terms of a time perspective, because mine are long. Mine are like an hour to an hour and a half. Yeah. Well, the Greatest Profession podcast.
Yeah. What is the podcast, and what are you talking about? Right. Like that's the question.
The podcast is called The Greatest Profession, and it is these are long form conversations about the human being behind the professional. I feel like a lot of times when we get in these discussions, it's a lot of like, who are you? I'm a veterinarian, and that's where it kind of stops. And there's so much intertwined that it's really difficult to like completely extricate, veterinarian from human. But there's so much more to like what we're going through, and I think that Anyway, so the podcast is highlighting that. My whole philosophy there is that it's like, if you're going through something like, you know, some sort of like, I don't want to do this anymore, you can look at other people and be like, oh, well, they also felt very similar. Like, I feel seen. Like, even this academic dean has felt this before, you know, now it puts us all a little bit more on a level playing field. Truly, the purpose is to like highlight people and say like, hey, look, you're human beings. Let's have some fun. Let's enjoy this a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they're long-form conversations, but they last about, I mean, truly what happens, and maybe this is a process thing, but you're talking to someone, a lot of times I don't know this person, right? So in 45 minutes, I can't really get to like that core thing, but once there's something that happens in that 40 to 50 minute period where just all of a sudden now you're talking about something that's like really new, like dear to them. And you get into some really interesting places. So that's why, because I've thought about, let's decrease it to half an hour, let's decrease it to 45 minutes, but I just like, that's where I could start there, I guess.
Yeah, that should be your podcast, like the 46th minute.
Yeah, that's
like,
funny.
Yeah. We've been talking for an hour now, but now we're into
I have thought about, I mean, that's something that very recently I've been like, well, what if I just summarized this first 45 minutes and just threw in little clips of what it was, and then all of a sudden you drop in, because now you have a less than an hour podcast.
So there's one of my favorite podcasts, and it's not vet related, nor is it family friendly at all times, but it's Rick Glassman's Take Your Shoes Off podcast, and he's a comedian, a stand-up comedian, and it is, I tried to get my wife to listen to it with me, and she was like, I feel like I'm having a seizure, because it's like all over the place, and he does, YouTube is his primary tool, and he has a illustrator that like, he'll be like, yeah, and then there's a bird just flying over Matt's head, and then they'll like illustrate a bird flying over his head, and he's like, I pooped on my shoulder, and then it's like, and it's
right.
But he has guests on that are usually like not people he's met, or some of our friends, some are people he hasn't met before. And a lot of the episodes, you'll be like listening, and the beginning of the episode will just be like something later, and he's like, okay, so yeah, I forgot to ask you who you are, so I'm going to put this at the beginning of the episode now. And it's like the first thing you're hearing, and they're telling like who they are and everything. He's like, okay, so in like, I don't know, I guess we're an hour and a half in, so an hour and a half from now you're going to hear this again. All right, go on. And like he'll throw that in, and then he throws in clips from like other shows.
Right.
It's like, it's really mind-melting if you listen to it, but it's even crazier if you watch it.
Sure.
But I do enjoy that one a lot, and it's and they're long form ones, and that's the thing that he finds is he's a comedian, he's very funny, he's very open about having autism, and he's take your shoes off because he's OCD. He doesn't want people to get things in his house in any way, and he's one of the best interviewers though that I've ever heard, because I do think that like some of that, the way that he is on the autism spectrum is like he doesn't filter out some of like the questions that you wouldn't ask someone in the first 45 minutes of the interview.
Right.
He would just be like, hey, so I saw a picture of you doing something that was kind of weird in the news the other day. And normally an interview would be like, could you tell me more about your recent activities in Kansas City? He'd be like, I saw a picture of you drunk in the bar in Kansas City hanging off a lampshade. And they're like, okay, yeah, I guess we could talk about that. So,
Megan, how many have you done podcasts?
Over 85 episodes. So
Yeah,
When did you start it?
weekly is a grind.
yeah, it is.
It
It is. My first episode was about April 1st, so a year and a half into it. Yeah. Never missed a week, every week. Yeah.
Which is so, I mean, even from the beginning, that's amazing. Because like I found early, I was like, well, I'm going to do this, but I don't know. Like I had no consistency at the beginning. Like, and I'm working relief ER, so like when I'm working, I'm gone to the world. So yeah, it was like a couple of weeks, and then here would be another one. Like the idea of committing to like an actual schedule, even now, is difficult, and I have like a system set up. So it's really impressive.
Very diligent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And doing all the editing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the key thing.
I mean, I get up super early, and I get it done. But I mean, I'm working full time too.
Yeah.
I'm the primary breadwinner of the house. I've got an entrepreneur husband, who, is self-employed. So I do stuff for him too, where as soon as I get back home on Thursday, I sleep and then I get in the car the next morning to drive down to a show in Orlando. So, I try to take that opportunity in cars to either, at least I work virtually, right? So I'm either taking work calls, or if it's not a work day, I'm editing all the way down.
Yeah.
You live in Orlando?
No, I live in Savannah, Georgia, but Orlando is only 4 hours away, which is slightly dangerous, but nice, depending on how big of a Disney fan you are.
My daughter lives in Orlando. She works for the NAVC.
Oh yeah, I think I knew that. I think I remember that. Yeah, it's doing a weekly one though. Yeah, it is a grind, and I mean, especially for how you're doing it too. I mean, that's my thing. I record every Monday afternoon to have an episode out every Tuesday morning. But
Fast turnaround.
Yeah.
well, the lucky thing that we have, and all of the credit, I just talk, which is my skill set. But our producer that I have, who does the editing and producing, is a team that I've worked with for a long time out of Ukraine. So the wonderful thing that happens for us is I record in the afternoon on Monday. I send them the files. They're asleep. They wake up first thing Tuesday morning. We're still asleep. And they edit it. They have all day Tuesday to edit the episode, and then they can release it Tuesday morning. And we wake up and there's an episode that's completed.
Oh, that's great.
So it works really
Yeah.
the time zone is a major factor there that makes life nice for us. And I try to do it in one clean take as much as possible, but sometimes it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
When you have a good editor that you have a good flow with, it's nice because you can just, there's times where I'll have like a 2-minute break in there where I'm like, oh, I need to look up how to say this company's name or this person's name. I'm like, hold on. They can hear me typing. It's like, okay. And then I'll say the name correctly like 3 or 4 times in case I mispronounce it in the story. And then I'll just say, hey, grab one of the clean names and insert it.
Oh, nice.
What did they use to edit?
A computer. I don't know. A black box of magic. I'm not sure what they use. I don't get into the sausage making. So,
Which seems wise, because like right now I'm having the person, so Fina is somebody that I found online. She lives in, I want to say Sweden, and she sends me Adobe files now, because like it's been really difficult I would get back these like very clean episodes, which is great and exactly what she should be doing for basically anything that isn't my podcast. And but my podcast is like, hey, we're human beings, and I want to make sure that like it is obvious that we had to think, or that we stumbled a little bit. I'm not so polished up and clean. This is a mistake, and that's okay. So that type of thing. So right now we're in the phase of, it's like the learning phase almost, where so she'll send me something, I'll put in markers of like, this is kind of roughly what I would cut out, and then I'll send it back, which is difficult.
Yeah, it takes, like Bogdan and Nastia, I've learned if I laugh at a stupid joke that I made, they'll know if it's like me just laughing and like keep it in to like continue the joke, or if it's like I really made myself laugh a lot on that one, so cut it out. And they do a full complete trust in everything that they do, which is nice. So like Nastya made had the intro music made, and then I recorded the first episode when we were doing just sort of the thing, and she sent it over to me, and she was the one that came up with the idea of putting in sort of the bird flutter sounds between each story as a delineation between each topic. And I was like, yeah, you're so much better at this than I am. So like, yeah, I mean, it's awesome to have like someone that you can really, really trust. And then we use Transistor FM to publish everything. So they go on Transistor, which I love because you get a website with it as well. So you don't have to build something if you're not pulling a lot of additional content from it, but they push that, and then they send us the clean audio file as well, and get all the analytics, and it publishes to more podcast platforms than I knew existed.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There are so many, but I have been scared to do video.
So is your goal to like hire somebody out at some point? Or
That would be great.
because part of it, right, is like this.
We need sponsors. That's what we're talking about. Let's get you sponsors.
Yep. I am fully open to sponsors now. Yeah.
'Cause the whole thing is really difficult. I mean, and we were talking a little bit about this yesterday. It's like there's so many reasons not to do it. You find out very quickly. It's all consuming, and like something has to kind of keep you going. There's like, for whatever reason, you love it. So I mean, how much of that is the work and how much of that is like just the interviewing? And so then what are you really willing to delegate? Which is not a way to ask a question, but but like, is there parts of it where it's like, yeah, it's a lot of work, but I really love doing it, so I'm going to keep doing it? Or would you rather offload everything?
I also know the value in partnering with people who do things better than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And when your ultimate goal is bringing value to your listeners, then that's when you make the decision of, there's somebody out there who can do this a lot faster and a lot better than I can, and so you delegate. And so I actually help lead another podcast it's a corporate podcast for where I work. And I mean, right out of the gate when they brought me on and say, we've been thinking about this, we just haven't had a go-getter get it started. I said, okay, well, number one rule is you will get an editor.
Right.
Because can I? Yes. But it's going to take me a lot longer and probably really more expensive than if you hire an editor out to do it.
Yeah.
And so some of that is understanding, your time is really valuable. So, I mean, my husband probably doesn't love that I spend a lot of time editing, but I get up super early when he's asleep. So most of the time he doesn't even know. Yeah, I think there's, when you're not investing your time into editing, you can be doing that to do other things that still help the mission, right? It's just finding what you're best at and making sure that that's what you do with your time.
Yeah.
So what time do you get up?
Goodness. So usually it's between 3 and 4 Eastern.
I knew you were going to say it. I knew it.
thought-
You looked like a 3 o'clocker.
Yes.
I saw Rob Dyrdek said, he was like, I've been trying to get up. Mark Wahlberg gets up at 4. He was like, I'm working myself to 4. And then he moved it to 3. And he was like, that's the middle of the night.
Actually, I heard somebody else talk about this too, is, finding your golden hour, and with your significant other, you kind of find, I was actually talking to Addie Reinhardt, and she gets to a point about 7 o'clock at night where her brain cannot work anymore. So that kind of helps, okay, I can't do work, but I can spend quality time with my significant other. And so they have that like 7 to 9, 10 and beyond.
My brain fires up creatively around 7 or 8.
In the morning?
No, at night.
Oh, at night? Oh.
Yeah, so if I need to do something really creative, I'll do it like in bed around 8 or so on the computer and can do that. But
That is interesting. Yeah, because I'm more like you, not 3 to 4. But if I was up at that
8
time,
to 9,
yeah. What I used to 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'm more like no. When I was writing my book, it was like I had to be in that room by roughly 8 o'clock, because even by 9 a.m. like I found that I was already kind of dwindling down, because by 11 a.m. it was like, I don't know, I'm just scraping the bottom of the bucket at that point. But it's tough. I mean, for me, it's like the responsibility of, I just feel like maybe I have FOMO and I always want to be up when other people are up. but like if Lindsay's up, then I'm like, all right, I'll stay up too. So those things meant that I was only sleeping like 5 hours a day or something.
That's me. I'm a night owl. I get up between 4 and 6, depending on, to be at work at 8, I get up at 6. If I have to be there at 7, I get up at 5. There's some days I have to be there at 6, so I get up at 4. But I usually work in my office until 6:30 p.m. I work long days. I don't take lunch. I eat at my desk, which is, they say don't do that.
Ultimate American.
I get like a second wind at like 3 in the afternoon, and then I'll have a ton of energy till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Sometimes I'll stay up till midnight.
Podcast-wise, I usually record in the afternoon, but it's because like I record a 15-minute episode, but it takes about 2.5 hours to do, because I'm reading the news, like it's going back through all the bookmark stories that I read, and then I tag all of them. I put them in my Google Doc that I use as kind of my teleprompter type script. And then I'm like, okay, let me order these so that if you're talking through them, okay, and then where's the thread that carries through? Okay, what's the episode previously where I mentioned this company and how does that carry into this one? And like structure the whole thing. And then it's like, Oh, record done. All right. Recording was super quick and done, but it's like it is a lot of those extra hours of the pre-work and everything too. But
Let's talk about sponsorship. So, where would you start with looking for sponsors?
Sponsorship? Yeah, that's my next goal. So I'm super fortunate to be working with Intelligence and the Fountain Report, which handles the publishing of the podcast and all of those sort of things.
You have a column in the Fountain Report.
I know you do. So you were in the same family now. We're related at this point. And so I mean, one of the goals is to start finding sponsors to sponsor episodes or sponsor, entire quarters or series or pieces like that. I need to have enough data, right, to bring to them and say, here's who they are, here's who's listening, here's what it is. But yeah, that's kind of the goal.
So I've had 3 or 4 companies reach out, a couple big, couple small, wanting to sponsor, and I haven't said yes or no. If somebody said, well, if you have a sponsor, then they get to dictate, what you do, what you don't do. How do you balance that?
You can just say no. I mean, when you start having the conversation, then that's on the table, right? Like they're gonna be like, well, and then you can't talk about this. And you're like, no. Like your relationship to me is that you can, basically do an ad or whatever. And I mean, everything is negotiable. Like the podcast space is so flexible and bizarre. No one really knows what it is, and they have like maybe some ideas of like, oh, this many listeners in like a general space equals this amount, but this many niche listeners, I don't know, this amount. But beyond that, everything is negotiable.
And I mean, I think all 3 of you have a unique opportunity as well, because you're not going to have to report on if your sponsor, poisoned and killed 1 million people or something like that, right? So like if I bring in a sponsor and their drug is recalled and it's a major story, I'm still going to report on that. And and that was one of the things actually. So I work for a company as well, and that was before I started working with Digitail, who I work with currently. I was like, hey, I do this podcast. This is something that's important. It's a great benefit for the company to have me doing this as well. But I just want to let you know, if there is a outage, or if there's something that happens that this company or my company, or if the Fountain Report misquotes a story and is brought up in the national news, I've told them hey, our job is to bring you the stories. You can't buy a nicer story about yourself, but it is hey, this is the advertiser. Here's your ad. People get to hear it. Okay, now here's the content. But I think for the 3 of you, I think it's a wonderful opportunity as well to be able to say, yeah, sure, advertise with me, and help bring in guests and partners and promotion and editors.
And how do you know what to charge?
Just keep putting zeros until they say no. No, I don't know.
That's like the Relief ER trick, right? Like at the end of the day, it's, in my opinion, what your ask is mostly has to do with what you're willing to accept. So that's going to be variable for everyone. Surely there are exact numbers and blah blah blah, but at the end of the day, if they're only offering $500 and that doesn't matter to you, then don't take it. But if you're like, I would do it for $50,000 and they won't give it, okay, then that's okay too.
Matt and I were talking a little bit about this because I think with people like us, and I don't know how many downloads you have, you may have millions, but when you have a smaller niche audience with a podcast, you have to think, in my mind, it's a little more creatively, because I listen to a lot of the big wig podcasters who are doing
Athletic
tips
Greens.
Right, and those, I really don't like this. They have nothing to do with what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But really, they'll talk about basing it on the number of downloads. But they have millions of downloads, and they'll put a number to that, and it's like, oh my goodness, if that's what I charged, I would be getting pennies based on that stat. So I think it's really aligning with, we have a very targeted audience. So I recommend partnering with somebody who really wants to reach that audience. I'm always thinking in a mutual capacity. Yes, your sponsorship is going to help me, but I want to make sure you have ROI too. So it's really understanding your audience so that you can help find the right sponsor that you can have that mutual relationship. And that doesn't answer the exact dollar. But again, I think it needs to be a little bit more creative on how you figure it.
It's got to be a win-win for both.
Yeah. Like for Consolidate That, it was super, super niche. Our goal was for the C-suite of the large consolidation groups to listen to it, as well as private equity and investors. It was, our primary audience was maybe 200 to 300 people. So if we got 100 downloads, we're like, well, we have 30% penetration into the market. Like, this is spectacular. But if you were like, for what I'm doing now, if I go, okay, like I got 100 downloads, like, cool, we're getting started. But yeah, I look at it the same way. I go, okay, the veterinary industry has this many people. That's the piece of the market. Okay, then you take out other things. And if you say, hey, I've got this penetration into the market by this many downloads versus, Joe Rogan saying, well, I get 80 million of the global downloads. You're like, okay, cool. So of 8 billion people, you get this percentage, but like we're looking at very specific and targeted audiences. So I do think each one of the podcasts has an opportunity to be really valuable for partners.
And there's a difference between sponsorship, advertising, and partnership, and that's totally up to you as well. Like if you were to be a partner, then you're more potentially beholden to whatever it is that they want. But that's like you would enter into that because you have the same values and you want to do something together. Like when I'm thinking about, so the greatest profession is kind of it's the background noise to something else that I want to build. And that's something else I want to build. I want to do it with partners because I think it does behoove the product to do it that way. I don't necessarily think, like I can't think of a great partnership for like the greatest profession, and so like that's not what I'm seeking. If that makes sense. Yeah. But a sponsor, or maybe, but it definitely adds, like sure, why not? Yeah. I'll throw those in the middle.
Yeah. And I think you need to account for that when you are working with a sponsor, that it's not just the podcast either. Because for me, I have a LinkedIn newsletter. I post on this platform and this platform. So all of those pieces need to be incorporated into the value that you're offering. Yeah. So don't sell yourself short. If you're posting your episodes on LinkedIn or Facebook, understanding your reach there too is very important.
Yeah, because that's like mine. We're looking at bringing in partners and sponsors that want to sponsor the Fountain Report or Pet Care Weekly or things like that can also participate in the bird bath and have that thread that carries through the entire experience for them. So that's.
So do you do more than one sponsor, like in an episode?
I have no sponsors yet. I don't think any of us have any sponsors yet, but I think the way we're hoping to go to monetization for it is to probably, because it's a 15-minute episode for me, I think it would be greedy to ask for people to listen to 3 minutes of ads to get 10 minutes of news, right? So I'm thinking we'll probably have 1 to 2 maximum 30-second or a 1-minute spot that brings in that ad read for somebody. And then we have the distribution channel of getting that ad out to our newsletter subscribers through the Fountain Report as well. So that's the other big piece. It's like that's where someone can find that consistent thread, right? They perhaps Nationwide is here, right? They sponsored a talk. Perhaps they sponsor a talk for you at a conference, and then they also sponsor your podcast. And it's like, hey, I've partnered with Nationwide for 2024 to help promote the content that I'm bringing to the industry. Like, I think that's kind of an interesting way, especially for someone that does a lot of speaking and does, engagements in universities and things too.
Yeah. That's a great idea, because companies sponsor a speaker to give one talk.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, if you start thinking about your platform being similar to, a conference, which, by the way, is evergreen, it's always available.
Yeah.
So over time, they really get this reach. Then you can maybe even think about it more of like sponsoring a talk, if it's like sponsoring one episode.
Yeah.
I need to run.
Great.
So what's a great way to wrap up this conversation?
Ryan.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming. Like, this was something that was kind of just like a offhand comment that we had at a conference, and then the Veterinary Innovation Council was so kind to allow us and kind of be a sponsor for us to come and participate. And yeah, I hope that we can do this again many, many, many more times, and that it can grow to be like a whole conference room of podcasters that are doing this.
Yeah, and thanks for your work in putting this together and working with the Veterinary Innovation Council. And
It really is a testament to like you can do anything.
Yeah.
Like it just takes an idea and like a couple of people to be like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. It was not as massive and terrifying of a lift as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So we can do it again.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for watching Vet Life Reimagined. This is still a growing channel on YouTube, so liking the video, subscribing to the channel, leaving comments, and sharing the show all go a long, long way right now, and it is all seen and appreciated.